Imagine a monarch, not brought down by the assassin's blade, nor by a foreign invasion, nor even by a devastating plague. Imagine a king whose downfall, whose very demise, was a slow, agonizing process of self-consumption. A king who, in the most literal and gruesome sense, ate himself to death. This is not a fable, though it sounds like one born from the darkest corners of human imagination. This is the forgotten, horrifying tale of King Theron of Eldoria, a man whose insatiable hunger became his grave, and whose story stands as one of the most bizarre and tragic footnotes in the sprawling, often grotesque, ledger of human history. Prepare yourselves, for the details are as unsettling as they are captivating. And while you prepare, if you find yourself drawn to the darker, more unsettling corners of history, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Your support helps. Unearth more of these chilling, forgotten tales for you. Now let's descend into the gilded cages and bulging waistcoats of a medieval court, to a time when a king's appetite became a kingdom's silent horror. Eldoria, in its prime, was a realm of verdant valleys and towering fortresses, a kingdom, nestled comfortably between the sprawling empires of the East and the maritime powers of the West. It was a land of plenty, its granaries overflowing, its rivers teeming with fish, its forests abundant with game. And at its heart stood the royal house of Theron, a lineage known for its robust kings, men of strength and hearty appetites, symbols of Eldoria's prosperity. For generations, a king's large frame was seen as a sign of his kingdom's wealth, his ability to command resources, his very success. A thin king was a sickly king, a sign of famine or ill health in his domain. But King Theron, born the fifth of his name, was destined to push this cultural ideal to its most horrifying extreme. From his earliest days, it was apparent that Theron was different. Not in intellect, for he was sharp and curious, nor in temperament, for he was generally genial, if a little stubborn. His difference lay in his relationship with food. While other royal children might pick at their gilded plates, Theron devoured his, then eyed his siblings' portions with an almost predatory glint. The royal cooks, accustomed to the delicate palates of young princes and princesses, quickly learned that Theron required double, sometimes triple, the servings. His nursemaids clucked their tongues, remarking on his healthy appetite, a phrase that, in hindsight, carries an unbearable weight of irony. As a boy, Theron was merely stout, a well-fed child of privilege. He enjoyed his lessons, though. He preferred the outdoor pursuits of hunting and riding, activities that, for a time, helped burn off the prodigious calories he consumed. His tutors spoke of a quick mind, capable of grasping complex diplomatic strategies and military tactics, but also of a distracting preoccupation with the next meal. Court chroniclers, ever keen to flatter, described him as robust and true son of Eldoria's bounty. They lauded his hearty laughter and his formidable presence, attributes that were increasingly tied to his expanding girth. As he entered adolescence, the healthy appetite became something more. It became a hunger that seemed to defy satisfaction, a craving that gnawed at him from within, irrespective of how much he consumed. It wasn't merely about taste or enjoyment. It was an urgency, a desperate need to fill a void that only seemed to grow larger with every bite. The royal kitchens, already grand, expanded their operations to cater solely to the young prince's burgeoning demands. Special dishes were prepared at all hours of the day and night. Sweets, meats, rich sauces, pastries, nothing was off limits. And everything was consumed in vast, unthinkable quantities. His clothing had to be constantly remade, then later, custom-tailored by the most skilled royal seamstresses, who struggled to keep pace with his ever-widening dimensions. When Theron ascended to the throne, still a relatively young man, the kingdom rejoiced. His coronation was a spectacle of opulence, marked by feasts of legendary proportions. Theron, already a colossal figure, presided over these banquets with an almost terrifying joy, eating not merely for sustenance, but for sport, for pleasure, for an unknown compulsion that drove him relentlessly. He consumed entire roasted boars, mountains of bread, rivers of wine, and platters piled high with game fowl, all washed down with vast quantities of mead and ale. The court, eager to please their new king, mimicked his habits, though none could truly keep pace. Obesity, in the court of Theron, became a strange kind of status symbol. Yet, beneath the veneer of celebration and abundance, a darker truth began to emerge. The king's size was no longer merely impressive. It was becoming debilitating. His movements grew ponderous. His breath came in wheezing gasps, and the once sharp mind began to show signs of lethargy, dulled by the sheer physical effort of carrying his own immense weight. The subtle cues of the body, the signals of satiety that govern normal human eating, seemed utterly broken within King Theron. He ate until he could physically eat no more, until his stomach rebelled, only to crave more just hours later. It was a horrifying, ceaseless cycle. The royal physicians, learned men who had studied the ancient texts of Galen and Hippocrates, were utterly baffled. They prescribed purges, bleeding, herbal remedies, and strict diets, all to no avail. Theron would feign compliance for a day or two, then succumb to an uncontrollable binge, consuming enough food for a small army. He would apologize to his physicians, then send them away with a wave of his massive hand, often to return later, with a fresh batch of their useless remedies and a request for a new, even larger, tunic. The kingdom, initially proud of their robust king, began to whisper. Travelers returning from the capital spoke of a monarch who rarely left his throne, a man so enormous he required assistance to even stand. The grand hunt, once Theron's greatest passion, became an impossibility. He could no longer mount a horse. His weight would crush the poor beast. Even walking became an arduous task, each step a struggle against the immense bulk that encased him. His legs swelled to grotesque proportions, his face became a puffy, unrecognizable mask, and his eyes, once bright and keen, receded into folds of flesh, retaining only a haunted, desperate look. The very machinery of governance began to falter. Council meetings were interrupted by the king's need for refreshment, often several times within an hour. Important documents lay unread, buried beneath platters of half-eaten food. Foreign envoys arriving at court were often shocked, even repulsed, by the spectacle of their host, a man who seemed to be melting into his own throne, constantly reaching for another morsel. They left with tales not of Eldorian strength, but of Eldorian excess and perhaps impending decay. His queen, a woman of grace and quiet dignity, grew increasingly distraught. She had married a strong, vibrant prince, and now watched, helpless, as he transformed into a grotesque parody of his former self. Their children, initially fascinated by their father's immense size, soon grew frightened, keeping a respectful distance from the man who was both their king and a horrifying example of uncontrolled consumption. The once grand royal bedchamber was now fitted with a specially reinforced bed, built with timbers more suited for a siege engine than a piece of furniture. Even then, the mattress sagged under his weight, and his breathing filled the room with a constant, alarming rasp. Sleep became fitful, punctuated by bouts of desperate hunger that drove him from his bed in search of food, often in the dead of night, summoning bewildered kitchen staff to prepare another feast. The sheer scale of his diet became legendary, even among his horrified staff. It was said he consumed an entire roasted pig for breakfast, followed by platters of eggs, bread, and cheese. Lunch would be several roasted geese, a side of venison, and loaves of fresh bread slathered in butter. Dinner, a truly epic affair, could consist of an entire cow or several sheep, accompanied by vast quantities of vegetables, fruits, and desserts. And between these gargantuan meals, there were constant snacks, bowls of nuts, dried fruits, pastries, honey cakes, and copious amounts of ale and wine, not just for pleasure, but seemingly to lubricate the endless journey of food into his stomach. His court, once bustling with life, became hushed and solemn. Courtiers walked on eggshells, fearing to displease the king, who, in his increasing discomfort, became prone to sudden, irrational outbursts of anger. He would demand food, and if it was not presented instantly, his wrath would be terrible. But once the food was there, he would quiet, consumed by the act of eating, lost to the world around him. The royal physicians, in their desperation, resorted to ever more extreme measures. They introduced concoctions of powerful laxatives, hoping to clear his system, but these only led to further agony and discomfort without curbing his appetite. They tried to trick him, filling his food with bitter herbs, but Theron would simply demand more, overriding the unpleasant taste with sheer volume. They even consulted with strange herbalists and mystics, seeking magical cures for a hunger that seemed supernatural in its intensity, but all their efforts were futile. The truth was, Theron was suffering from a condition far beyond the understanding of medieval medicine, a condition that, in modern terms, might be described as morbid obesity combined with a severe, perhaps psychological, eating disorder. His body, once a source of strength, had become his prison, a mountainous landscape of flesh that trapped him, slowly suffocating the king he once was. The logistics of caring for King Theron became a daily challenge. Special chairs had to be constructed, reinforced with iron bands, simply to bear his weight. Doors had to be widened for him to pass through. His retinue grew, not with knights or scholars, but with servants whose sole task was to assist him in his movements, to help him dress, to carry him from one room to another. His life became a static existence, bound to his throne in the great hall or his reinforced bed in the royal chambers. He rarely saw the sun, rarely felt the wind, consumed by the indoor world of his own relentless hunger. The once powerful monarch, who had led armies and signed treaties, was now reduced to a figure of pity and revulsion, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones by his own subjects. The kingdom began to suffer, with the king incapacitated by his own body. The real power began to shift. Ambitious nobles jostled for influence, knowing that the king, in his stupor of consumption, could not effectively govern. Taxation became erratic, justice was delayed, and the defenses of Eldoria, once formidable, began to crumble as funds were diverted to the royal kitchens and the endless supply of foodstuffs. The irony was not lost on some of the more observant members of the court. The very abundance of Eldoria, which had nurtured its kings for centuries, was now consuming its current monarch, and through him, threatening the stability of the entire realm. As the years wore on, Theron's condition deteriorated. Further, his skin, stretched to its limit, began to crack and fester, prone to infections that the physicians, despite their best efforts, could not adequately treat. His joints, bearing an unbearable load, swelled to the size of small pumpkins, making any movement excruciating. He suffered from constant shortness of breath, his lungs struggling to expand beneath the suffocating weight of his own flesh. The simple act of breathing became a torment, a constant reminder of his escalating misery. His final months were a living nightmare. He could no longer speak clearly, his voice reduced to a raspy whisper, muffled by the folds of his throat. His vision began to fail, his eyes clouded by cataracts, and he spent most of his days in a semi-conscious stupor, roused only by the offer of food. Even then, the act of chewing and swallowing became a struggle, his mouth, once a cavern, now filled with the sheer effort of consumption. The court rarely saw him. Only a select few loyal and hardened servants, tended to him, performing the most intimate and unspeakable duties. They changed his soiled linens, cleaned his festering sores, and continued to bring him food, even as the sight of it became revolting, a testament to their unwavering, if grim, devotion. The royal kitchens, once a symbol of opulence, became a factory of dread, churning out meals that were immediately consumed by the king, only to bring him closer to his inevitable end. On a bleak winter morning, as the first light filtered through the stained glass windows of the royal bedchamber, the silence was profound. King Theron, King of Eldoria, the man who had eaten a kingdom's worth of food, finally ceased to breathe. He did not die in battle, nor in his sleep, nor from a sudden illness. He simply finally ran out of capacity. His body, bloated beyond recognition, had given up the fight, utterly consumed by the burden it carried. The sheer scale of him was terrifying. It took over a dozen strong men, using ropes and specially constructed stretchers to move his remains. The royal embalmers were faced with a task of unprecedented difficulty. His coffin, when it was finally constructed, was a monumental affair, crafted from the stoutest oak and reinforced with iron, resembling more a crypt than a burial vessel. He was interred in the royal mausoleum, alongside his ancestors, but his tomb was twice the size of any other, a silent, weighty testament to his grotesque end. The reign of King Theron of Eldoria became a dark stain on the kingdom's history, a period quietly glossed over in later chronicles. The lessons were stark, and they reverberated through the generations. The court of Eldoria swung violently in the opposite direction, promoting austerity and physical discipline. Future kings were encouraged to be lean and active, to demonstrate control and moderation, in stark contrast to the horrifying legacy of their predecessor. A tale of the king who ate himself to death became a cautionary whisper, a grim fable told to remind future monarchs of the perils of unchecked indulgence, of a hunger that, when left unrestrained, can devour not just a man, but an entire kingdom. It serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the most horrific monsters are not found in the shadows or at the gates, but within ourselves, within the very appetites that are meant to sustain us. And sometimes the most profound and unsettling tragedies are those we inflict upon ourselves, one bite at a time. Thank you for joining us on this unsettling journey into a forgotten past. If this tale of the king who ate himself to death intrigued and horrified you, consider subscribing to Muted Historian for more deep dives into the bizarre and untold stories of history. We're always uncovering something shocking. Until next time, stay curious, and remember, history is far stranger than fiction.